The Forgotten Mesopotamians, the Kassites. A forgotten Mesopotamian power. Civilization has thrived for over 5,000 years in what was once known as Mesopotamia, and which today is Iraq. Beyond Egypt, China, and a few other parts of the world like the Indus Valley in India and Pakistan and parts of central Turkey, there are few places with as long and complex a history. Unsurprisingly, there are numerous civilizations of Mesopotamia that many people have heard of. Babylon and the Babylonians are ubiquitous, while those with a decent knowledge of the ancient world will have heard of the Sumerians, the Assyrians, and the Akkadians, all Mesopotamian powers of one kind or another. The position of the Kassites is quite unusual then. These are a power that dominated Mesopotamia for a period of 400 years between the mid-16th century BCE and the mid-12th century BCE. They provided critical continuity between the old Babylonian Empire that preceded them and the Neo-Assyrian Empire that came after them, a period during which the Late Bronze Age collapse occurred. The Kassites survived this collapse, whereas other more well-known states of the ancient Near East, like the Hittite Empire, did not. This is the story of the Kassites, the forgotten power of ancient Mesopotamia. Emergence. The origins of the Kassites are unclear. There is some evidence which suggests that they were already residing in parts of Mesopotamia, a region dominated by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and synonymous with modern-day Iraq by the 22nd century BCE. This was over half a millennium before they emerged as a regional power. By the time of the rise of the old Babylonian Empire as the major power in Mesopotamia in the 18th century BCE, the Kassites were clearly present in the region, though they remained a negligible power by then, tribespeople living on the Mesopotamian end of the Zagros Mountains. What's confusing is what their ethnic relationship with other groups of Mesopotamia, like the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, was in the first place. The Kassite language is almost certainly an isolated language, meaning it is a language which is not related to the languages spoken by the people who lived in the same geopolitical region. Isolate languages generally develop when groups migrate large distances in a comparatively short period of time and then settle in a region where the people around them have not influenced their lingual development. This suggests the Kassites migrated into Mesopotamia at some stage towards the late 3rd millennium BCE, rather than emerging as a distinct group from within the region. This is not absolutely clear, though. We don't have a large enough amount of the Kassite language available to establish concretely that it is an isolate language beyond any reasonable doubt. Successor to the Babylonians. The Kassites might have remained a relatively minor entity within Mesopotamia had it not been for developments within the wider Near East in the 16th century BCE. This was a time of immense growth and trade, when powerful states and empires like the New Kingdom Egypt and the Hittite Empire of Turkey were coming to the peak of their powers. Mesopotamia had its great power too at this time, specifically the old Babylonian Empire, which made substantial contributions to the early history of science, astronomy, and mathematics. The Babylonian state, though, was not as militarily strong as some of its neighbors, and in the 16th century BCE, the Hittites invaded Babylon and sacked their capital. This did not bring about the complete collapse of Babylon, but they were reduced substantially in strength. In the ensuing power vacuum, the Kassites emerged as a new power within Mesopotamia. Extent of power. The decline of the Babylonian state after the Hittite attack was clearly the spark which led the Kassites to begin descending from their strongholds in the Zagros Mountains south into southern Mesopotamia. The course of events is not entirely clear, but not long after this Hittite attack, we begin to find rulers in southern Mesopotamia with Kassite names, indicating they had assumed power here in the aftermath of the Hittite raids. It was the beginning of a period of over 4 centuries of Kassite domination of significant parts of Mesopotamia. The First Sealand dynasty established control over the richer and more populous cities of the lower course of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers around 1475 BCE. Earlier histories tended to categorize the period between 1475 BCE and around 1050 BCE as the Middle Babylonian period, a period bookended by the Old Babylonian Empire and the rise of new powers such as the Neo-Assyrian Empire. However, this periodization does not give sufficient credit to the fact that the Kassites were an entirely distinct power that was in control of southern Mesopotamia for most of this period. The Kassites' power and the wealth they controlled through taxation and tribute was considerable. It was sufficient that by the end of the 15th century, one of their rulers, King Kurigalzu I, could embark on building a new royal capital, one which he called Dur Kurigalzu, the Fortress of Kurigalzu. This was laid out with a series of palaces and temple complexes that rivaled those built by many more well-known monarchs at Hattusa in the Hittite Empire or at Thebes in New Kingdom Egypt. The state Kurigalzu ruled over was equally formidable. As well as comprising southern and central Mesopotamia and parts of the Zagros Mountains, it stretched south to the Persian Gulf, and there is evidence that he controlled the island of Bahrain. This was the peak of the Bronze Age, and the Kassite state had strong trade connections westwards and northwards with the Mitanni, Assyrians and Canaanites in northern Mesopotamia and the Levant. A sign of the Kassite kingdom's place in the international order that prevailed in those times is seen in the fact that there are numerous clay tablets amongst the Amarna letters between the Egyptians and Kassites. These are a huge store of clay tablet letters found at Amarna in Egypt, dating to the mid-14th century. Unfortunately, though, we are limited in how much more information we can recover concerning Kassite statecraft and diplomacy. Some of this is sheer inertia. Only about 10% of the extant letters concerning the Kassites have been published in modern editions, limiting scholarly inquiry. More difficult to remedy are the archaeological constraints. The city of Nippur, for instance, was one of the main centers of Kassite settlement and administration. Thousands of letters in the shape of clay tablets have been found here dating to the Kassite period, and the site would clearly reveal much more if it could be excavated. However, the Kassite remains are covered by archaeological sites dating to the later Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian eras, which would incur damage if they were excavated through to get to the Kassite remains. This, along with high groundwater levels at the site today, means that this Kassite site cannot be excavated properly. For this and numerous other reasons, the exact nature of Kassite rule and society remains only partially understood. Art and culture. While the archaeological record is patchy for Kassite history, we know enough to see that they became skilled potters and craftsmen. In this, they adopted many elements of Babylonian art and culture, while adding their own unique twist to it. Kassite craftsmen primarily used clay to mold sophisticated statues of humans and animals. Often, these were inlaid with precious gemstones that were traded from Egypt and other polities to the west. Architecturally, they began experimenting with using glazed brick to erect their tombs, a novel technique which was continued and perfected by the Neo-Babylonians and Persians centuries later. Cylinder seals, often demonstrating a high level of proficiency amongst their carvers, are also extant from the Kassite era. However, Perhaps their most impressive artistic achievement are the Kuduru boundary stones, which they set up as inscribed monuments recording public statements or making declarations about the achievements of Kassite rulers. Although referred to as boundary stones, these Kuduru were often actually established within temple precincts and were highly ornate, consisting of carved and polished stone. They included divine symbols of the Kassite deities, ones which demonstrate the manner in which Babylonian and Kassite gods and goddesses were fused in the religious system of conqueror and conquered. Decline and fall. The Kassite state was at its height in the 15th and 14th centuries BCE. Thereafter, a gradual decline commenced. In the 13th century, the late Bronze Age world of the Near East experienced a series of cataclysmic events which caused such a social, political, and economic regression that historians of the ancient world now refer to it as the Late Bronze Age collapse. It brought the Hittite Empire to an end and led to a dramatic decline in Egypt's affairs, while both Mycenae and Minoa in Greece and Crete largely disappeared during this time. The Kassite state was protected to some extent, as it lay well away from the eastern Mediterranean and so was not targeted by the attacks of the mysterious sea people who were responsible for much of the collapse. Yet the decline in trade and general disruption further to the west inevitably impacted on the Kassite kingdom. On top of this, the Kassites eventually began to experience difficulties with their neighbors. One aspect of the Iron Age that began around the 12th century was that the center of gravity south of the Caspian Sea began to shift further eastwards from Mesopotamia to Persia, modern-day Iran. Beginning in the late 13th century and continuing into the 12th century BCE, the Kassites clashed with an emerging power to the east, the Elamites. These raids developed into full-scale war, and in 1155 BCE, the final Kassite dynasty lost power in the face of attacks by the Elamites and the Assyrians. A period of flux followed before the Neo-Assyrian Empire emerged as a new great power of Mesopotamia in the 10th century BCE. It is much more well known today, though counterintuitively it lasted for a period of less than 300 years, substantially less than the Kassites were around for. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel to show your support and watch more content like this. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's it for now. We'll see you in the next one.